They said no one would ever speak of the night that shattered illusions across America. But I'm going to tell you anyway, because it involves the darkest secret of the Great Depression, one that everyone refused to believe until now. My name is John Harrington, and I was there, in a cramped alley behind a diner in downtown Chicago, watching as the unthinkable unfolded. The year was 1932, and the country was drowning in despair. Bread lines stretched around corners, banks shuttered without warning, and hope slipped away with each passing day. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what I witnessed in that alley, a confrontation that would change my life and the entire nation forever. The man who stumbled into my view wore a tattered coat and had eyes filled with desperation. Behind him came two figures in expensive suits, their polished shoes tapping ominously against the wet cobblestones. I pressed myself against the brick wall, hammering as I tried to remain invisible. One of the well-dressed men, a tall fellow with slick-back hair, hissed, "You should have kept your mouth shut. Arthur, the government won't save you now." The other man, shorter but with a dangerous glint in his eye, snarled, "Hand it over. We know you stole the files." The man in the tattered coat, Arthur, I learned his name only later, clutched a worn leather satchel to his chest. His voice trembled. "They have to know the truth," he pleaded. "You can't hide it forever." Tall man smirked. "Watch us." Then, without warning, he swung a fist into Arthur's ribs. Arthur collapsed in pain, gasping for air. Short man kicked him once, twice. As I watched in horror, I wanted to run, to scream, but fear welded my feet to the ground. I couldn't tear my gaze away. Eventually, Arthur coughed, and with trembling fingers he thrust the satchel forward. "Take it," he croaked, and his eyes flicked toward me for the briefest second. In that moment, I felt an electric jolt of responsibility surge through my veins, a silent plea woven into his gaze. Tall man snatched the satchel and nodded to his partner, who lifted Arthur by the collar and pinned him against the wall. Short man growled, "Who else knows?" Arthur grimaced. "No one." He lied. I could sense his terror, sense he was protecting someone. Perhaps he was protecting me, or perhaps someone else entirely. Tall man said, "Stop lying. You were seen." My breath caught in my throat. Had they spotted me too? The possibility struck terror in my heart. I held perfectly still, pressing against the damp bricks as if I could merge with them. My life as a simple ex-factory worker had been dull and uneventful until I lost my job and found myself roaming the streets in search of a dime to buy bread. Now, suddenly, I was entangled in a secret I knew nothing about. Arthur shook his head, refusing to speak. Short man slammed a forearm into his throat. "We're done being nice. You know what this is really about. You shouldn't have gone digging where you didn't belong." Arthur's voice emerged ragged as he whispered, "People deserve to know. It's worse than they think." Short man sneered. "They can't handle the truth. If this gets out, it'll tear the country apart." Tall man's voice dropped to a menacing murmur. "Let the depression end first. Then the big boys can decide what they want the public to hear." In my hidden vantage point, I felt a wave of confusion. What was in those files? How could anything be so dire that it had to be kept from the suffering masses? I watched, paralyzed, as Arthur sagged in their grip. His eyes flicked my way again, just as the men began dragging him down the alley. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would echo off the stone walls. "Don't you dare die on us," Tall man hissed. "We need answers." Arthur let out a painful groan. As they dragged him, the satchel clutched by the shorter man, I saw something slip from the bag's ripped seam. A single sheet of paper fluttered onto the cobblestones. Without pausing, they disappeared around the corner, leaving the paper behind. For a moment, I stood in the silence of that desolate alley, water dripping from a rusty gutter, the scent of garbage heavy in the air, until a distant horn blared and snapped me out of my trance. Slowly, I crept forward, each step feeling like I was crossing into dangerous territory. But my curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I picked up the sheet of paper and squinted at it under a flickering street lamp. It was a typed memo, partially blurred by moisture, referencing a meeting between Federal Reserve officials and certain corporate backers. Words like coercion, market manipulation, and mass concealment jumped out at me, igniting a tempest of shock in my gut. At the bottom, a faint signature read simply WT. The rest was too smeared to decipher. Immediately, questions battered my mind. Was the Great Depression an accident or the result of deliberate actions by powerful interests? I'd always heard whispers conspiracies about bankers, politicians, and industrialists pulling strings, but I'd never believed such talk. Now, I held tangible evidence in my shaking hands. Arthur had risked his life to reveal this. My world turned upside down in that instant. My first instinct was to run, hide, pretend none of this had happened. But then I remembered Arthur's pleading gaze, the silent cry for help that he cast my way. I couldn't walk away. I tucked the paper into my coat pocket and hurried out of the alley, my mind racing with conflicting emotions, dread, excitement, and an unfamiliar sense of purpose. By the time I reached the small flop house where I was renting a dingy room, the adrenaline had turned into a headache pounding behind my eyes. Mrs. Coleman, the landlady, saw me slip in and called out, "John, you look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just a rough day, ma'am." She nodded sympathetically. But as soon as her back was turned, I rushed up the creaking stairs and locked myself in my room. The single overhead bulb buzzed as I set the paper on the rickety table. As I studied the memo again, a name stood out: Senator Williams. That was a name I recognized from newspaper headlines. Senator Reuben Williams was a popular figure who claimed he wanted to help the poor, championing relief efforts and job programs. But if he was involved in underhanded dealings, that meant corruption ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept dreaming of footsteps outside my door, men in suits coming to silence me. I heard Arthur's pained gasps echo in my mind and woke up drenched in sweat, the memo still clutched in my hand. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the threadbare curtains, I decided I needed answers. I had to find Arthur, assuming he was still alive. If I found him, maybe I could discover the full story. A plan formed in my mind, though it was more of a desperate hope than a plan. I would start where I'd last seen him. Nobody was in the alley when I returned that morning, but something dark stained the ground near where Arthur had been beaten. My stomach twisted at the sight of that dried puddle. I nearly gave up right there, but then I noticed a young woman sweeping the stoop of an adjacent boarding house. I approached her cautiously, trying to appear harmless. "Excuse me," I said softly. She looked up, startled, then eyed me suspiciously. "What do you want?" "Last night, there was a disturbance," I began. "Did you see anything?" She hesitated, glancing around as though worried she might be overheard. "I saw two men pulling a fellow into a black sedan. They tossed him in the back seat like a sack of flour. Then they sped off." I felt a lead weight in my chest. "Did you catch any license number or where they might have gone?" She shook her head. "License plates were caked in mud, and I didn't dare step outside." I was scared for my life. Her gaze flickered to my coat pocket, as if sensing the paper's importance. But she said nothing more, just turned away and resumed sweeping. Defeated, I roamed the city for hours, checking hospitals, police stations, anywhere a battered man might be taken. Yet no one admitted to seeing Arthur. People were too busy battling their own miseries. They had little interest in a stranger's problems. At dusk, as I wandered aimlessly, I realized I needed help from someone who had connections, someone who might know the underbelly of Chicago and the men in suits who enforced secrets. That led me to the only person I could think of, Henry Hank Whitaker, a former Pinkerton detective turned private eye who'd fallen on hard times. I'd done odd jobs for him in the past, delivering letters when I was desperate for a few coins. Hank's office was a tiny room above a shuttered bakery, and I found him there nursing a bottle of whiskey. He was unshaven, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. John. He greeted me warily. Heard you lost your job. What brings you here? I closed the door behind me. I need information. And maybe protection. Hank raised an eyebrow, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Protection. From who? I swallowed hard. Powerful people. He stared at me for a moment, then motioned for me to sit. Start talking. I recounted the events of the previous night in hushed tones. Hank listened without interrupting, though his expression grew darker with every word. When I showed him the damp, crumpled memo, he whistled softly. This is big. Big enough to get a man killed. I nodded. Arthur might already be. My throat tightened. I just need to know who those men were and where they might have taken him. Hank set down his glass. You realize if we go poking around, we could end up in a ditch. I know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I can't walk away. He risked his life for this. Hank rubbed his stubbled jaw. All right, I've still got a few contacts. But if what you say is true, these aren't just local thugs. They might be connected to big shots in Washington. Senator Williams, I said. Hank's eyes flicked to the memo again. I've heard rumors about him. He's got backdoor dealings with some bankers. Could be the tip of the iceberg. He sighed. Let me make a few calls. We spent the rest of the evening hunched over Hank's desk, the phone line crackling every time he dialed. He reached out to old Pinkerton colleagues, police insiders, even a shady club owner who sometimes employed enforcers. The story that emerged was grim. A new group of hired guns had arrived in Chicago, rumored to be working for certain political figures. Their mission: to silence leaks about suspicious financial activities linking major banks, high-ranking senators, and possibly even officials in the Treasury Department. Arthur's name never came up directly, but the pieces fit. Hank set down the receiver after his last call. It's worse than I thought, he murmured. They're not just after him. They're after any evidence that might point to how orchestrated this depression could have been. The reality pressed on my chest like an iron weight. Orchestrated, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Could men really sink an entire nation just to grow their power? Hank gave me a tired look. I've seen enough in my time to know that greed has no limit. We decided we needed to confront someone with ties to Senator Williams. There was a local fundraiser the senator's office had arranged to show the public how charitable he was. Rumor had it that big donors and political cronies would gather at the Hotel Le Grand. If Arthur was still alive, maybe they were holding him somewhere nearby, or maybe we could glean information from a crooked operative. It was a dangerous gamble, but we had no other leads. The next evening, we slipped into the opulent lobby of the Hotel Le Grand, overshadowed by marble pillars, crystal chandeliers, and a string quartet playing near the entrance to the ballroom. Guests in glamorous attire swept past us, and servers carried trays of champagne flutes. The contrast between this lavish world and the breadlines outside made me burn with anger. Hank and I tried to blend in, though our worn suits stood out among the finery. Hank scanned the crowd. Keep an eye out for anyone who looks like they don't belong. Thugs in suits. My gaze roamed over groups of men standing stiffly by the walls, their eyes shifting warily. I spotted one who had the same build as Tall Man, broad shoulders, an air of arrogance. My heart pounded. Hank, I whispered, nudging him. Hank followed my gaze and nodded. That's one of them, right? I think so, I said, swallowing hard. The tall one. Hank squared his shoulders. Let's move closer. We edged through the crowd until we could overhear snippets of conversation. Tall Man was speaking with a pudgy individual who wore a massive diamond ring. Pudgy Man said, Senator Williams doesn't want any more slip-ups. Where's the bag? Tall Man gave a curt nod. We've got it. But the rat who took it gave us some trouble. Pudgy Man's voice dropped. You made sure to keep him quiet. Tall Man's lips twisted into a smug grin. He's in a safe place, and he won't be squealing to anyone soon. Trust me. Anger flared inside me. So Arthur was alive. being held somewhere, probably tortured or coerced into silence. I clenched my fists, but Hank gripped my arm, signaling me to stay calm. Pudgy Man asked, "What about the copy? I heard rumors there might be duplicates." Tall Man shrugged. "We're looking into it. If anyone else had a copy, we'd know by now." My heart lurched as I realized the significance of the page in my pocket. I had the only surviving duplicate, at least, that they knew about. Hank leaned close, whispering, "We need to find out where they're keeping Arthur." I nodded. Just then, the short man from the alley stepped into view. He clapped Tall Man on the shoulder. "Boss wants you in the lounge," he said. "Something about a certain guest who needs more persuasion." Tall Man nodded. "All right, let's go." They headed toward a set of ornate doors at the back of the ballroom. Hank and I exchanged glances. I could practically feel our hearts pounding in tandem. We followed discreetly, ducking behind clusters of chattering guests. The doors led to a dark corridor lined with portraits of stern-looking gentlemen from decades past. At the end was a mahogany door guarded by two imposing men in black suits. Tall Man and Short Man flashed them some kind of pass and disappeared inside. We were stuck. Hank grabbed my shoulder. "We need a distraction." I looked around desperately, noticing a nearby electrical panel on the wall. "What if we kill the lights?" I whispered. Hank nodded. "That might work, but once we do it, we have to move fast." I took a deep breath and crept over to the panel. Sweat trickled down my temple as I fiddled with the levers and switches. Then, with a final yank, the corridor plunged into darkness. Startled shouts erupted. I heard the guards' panicked voices. Hank and I sprinted down the hall, our footsteps masked by the sudden chaos. We reached the door, and Hank barreled into one guard, toppling him. The other guard swung blindly. Hank blocked, and they grappled in the dim light spilling from under the door. I crouched, fumbling for the handle. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. I slipped inside and found myself in a richly furnished lounge, faintly illuminated by the glow of a fireplace. My stomach turned at the sight before me. Senator Williams himself, recognizable from countless newspaper photos, stood with an air of righteous fury. Arthur was slumped in a chair, hands bound behind him, face bruised and swollen. Tall Man and Short Man whirled around at my entrance. Senator Williams barked, "Who the hell are you?" My mind whirled as I tried to come up with something clever, but adrenaline took over. "Let him go," I shouted, voice trembling with equal parts fear and rage. Arthur's eyes flicked open, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "John," he rasped. Short Man lunged at me, but in the darkness, I managed to sidestep him. I crashed into a side table, sending expensive liquors shattering to the floor. The senator reeled back, cursing, while Tall Man reached inside his coat, presumably for a weapon. Then the door burst open again. Hank stumbling in after dealing with the guards. He grabbed a brass poker from the fireplace and pointed it menacingly. "Stay back," he growled. Senator Williams's eyes blazed with anger. "You're making a grave mistake. You have no idea how high this goes." Hank kept the poker steady. "We know enough," Short Man sneered. "If you knew enough, you'd be running the other way." Tall Man spoke in a clipped tone. "Give us the duplicates, and maybe we'll let you live." My pulse hammered as I realized the dangers of brandishing the memo. Instead, I bluffed. "Everything's already been sent to the newspapers. More copies will be leaked if anything happens to us." That gave them pause. The senator's face contorted with fury. "You reckless fools. You'll destroy what little stability remains in this nation. The people can't handle the truth. They need to believe in the system. Exposing all of this will cause chaos, riots, perhaps even revolution." Arthur moaned from the chair. "Let them riot," he spat weakly. "Better they know than starve under false promises." Senator Williams turned to Arthur, voice dripping with scorn. "You're an idealist. You think uncovering a few secrets will fix anything. The depression will end eventually, and the masses will believe whatever story we feed them. That's how power works," Hank snarled. "So you'd rather keep everyone in the dark, let them suffer, while you profit?" Tall Man stepped forward, ignoring the poker. "That's how the world really turns." People like you are too naive to survive in it. Suddenly, the corridor lights flickered back on, revealing the full scope of the lush lounge. I realized we were cornered, no windows, one door behind us. The senator and his goons blocking our path to Arthur before they could make a move. Hank feigned a swing with the poker at Short Man, forcing him to jump back. That gave me just enough space to dash to Arthur's side. I started untying him, my fingers fumbling with the ropes. Arthur hissed in pain as I pulled the cords from his raw wrists, and he slumped forward. Hank tried to keep the men at bay, but I could see them circling. The senator barked. "Seize them!" Tall Man lunged. Hank swung the poker, catching him in the shoulder. With a roar, Tall Man staggered. Short Man tackled Hank to the ground, the poker clattering away. Senator Williams, breathing heavily, pointed a trembling finger at me. "You won't get out of here alive." I pulled Arthur's arm around my shoulder, lifting him to his feet. He winced, but adrenaline gave him strength. Together, we staggered toward the door just as Short Man pinned Hank. In desperation, Hank slammed his knee into Short Man's stomach, throwing him off. Hank scrambled up, grabbed a heavy ashtray, and hurled it at the senator, who ducked with surprising agility for a man of his age. Tall Man clutched his bruised shoulder, then hurled himself at me and Arthur. I braced for impact, but from behind came a deafening crack. Hank had retrieved the poker and brought it down on Tall Man's head. Tall Man crumpled with a guttural groan. The senator's face twisted in shock, and Short Man cursed viciously, scrambling to help his partner. That was our chance. Hank, Arthur, and I barreled through the door and into the corridor. Alarmed guests gasped in the ballroom as we burst out, sweat-soaked and bloody. Hotel security guards converged, confused by the chaos. I shouted, "They're holding a man hostage," as we pushed past them. Some of the guests shrieked, and whispers spread like wildfire. We had to get out before more of the senator's muscle arrived. I half-dragged Arthur across the lobby, while Hank shoved aside anyone who tried to block our path. Outside, the city's night air felt shockingly cold. We stumbled onto the sidewalk, weaving through the swirl of fancy cars. Finally, we ducked into a narrow side street, panting. Arthur sagged against a brick wall, struggling to breathe. His face was a patchwork of bruises. Hank wiped blood from his lip. "We can't stay here," I nodded. "We need someplace safe," Arthur croaked. "My sister, Sarah, she lives in a boarding house on Willow Street." He coughed. "She can hide us." We helped him along, moving as quickly as we could. Willow Street wasn't far, but every shadow felt menacing. At last, we found the small boarding house, a humble, two-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Hank knocked quietly. A moment later, a slim woman with tired eyes opened the door. Her expression shifted to horror when she saw Arthur. "My God, what happened?" she cried, voice trembling, as she ushered us inside. Arthur managed a weak chuckle. "Just a little disagreement." Sarah shot him a look of disbelief. "I'll get some bandages." While she fetched supplies, we settled Arthur on a battered sofa in a modest living room. The place smelled of bread and old furniture, but there was a warmth to it that eased some of my tension. Hank paced restlessly. "We can't keep running. They'll be looking for us." I pulled the memo from my pocket and handed it to Arthur. "This is the only piece I managed to save." Arthur stared at it, his eyes welling with tears. "You picked it up." I nodded. "I saw it fall. I knew it was important." His voice cracked. "I had documents that pointed to a coordinated effort by certain bankers and government officials to ensure a financial collapse that benefited their interests. I discovered references to manipulated loans, artificial inflations, withheld resources enough to cripple the economy. But why? To consolidate power, buy up assets for pennies. And then, when it all got better, they'd own everything." Sarah returned, kneeling beside Arthur with a basin of warm water. Gently, she dabbed his wounds. "You told me you were looking into something big, but I never imagined this." Arthur winced. "I wanted to do the right thing, Sarah. People are starving, losing their homes, and it's all because a handful of men decided they could profit from misery." Hank rubbed his chin. "And Senator Williams is in on it. Arthur nodded grimly. He's one of the ringleaders. He masks it behind public speeches about relief and recovery. But behind closed doors, he's orchestrating deals that funnel money to cronies. I swallowed hard. What do we do now? Arthur's gaze flicked to each of us. We can't stay silent. The public deserves to know. Sarah looked terrified. If you try to expose them, you'll be hunted. You could be killed. Hank folded his arms. Better to risk death, telling the truth, than live in fear of their power. We can try to get it to the press. Maybe not the big newspapers. They might be compromised, but there are smaller, independent ones that still care about honest reporting. Arthur managed a small smile. That's our best shot. Sarah's voice shook with emotion. Arthur, I can't lose you. You almost died. He held her hand. I'm sorry, but I have to see this through. We laid low for the night. Sarah gave me a blanket and pillow on the floor, while Hank took a chair by the window, keeping watch. None of us slept well. Every noise outside made us jump. By morning, we shared a meager breakfast of bread and weak coffee. Arthur's bruises looked worse in the light, but he insisted he was ready to move. Hank used the phone in the hallway to call a contact at a small newspaper called the City Ledger, an old friend of his, Marjorie Reynolds. Worked there as a reporter known for tackling gritty stories no one else would touch. He spoke in code, using references only she would understand, asking for a discreet meeting in a public place. She agreed. We took a streetcar across town. Arthur and Sarah disguised in second-hand coats and hats. Hank and I did our best to look inconspicuous. We got off near Jackson Park, a wide green space that was nearly empty in the chill morning air. Marjorie was waiting by a bench, wearing a plain gray coat, her face serious. She greeted Hank with a nod, then sized up Arthur's injuries. You boys weren't kidding, she said softly. Arthur handed her the memo. This is all I have left. The rest was taken, but it's enough. She read it, eyes widening. Federal Reserve involvement, political conspiracies. This is dynamite. Hank glanced around warily. We need to get it published fast. Before they track us down. Marjorie's voice quivered with contained excitement. The Ledger's editor might be afraid to run it, but I'll push. We can't let them bury this. Arthur nodded. I have more information in my head. I can give you names, dates, places. The pieces will fit together. Just then, Sarah let out a startled cry. Across the park, I spotted a figure in a dark coat, moving swiftly in our direction. My blood turned to ice as I recognized Short Man. He had a gun drawn, hidden partially by his coat. Marjorie gasped. We need to go. We turned to run, but Short Man shouted, Stop. People in the park screamed and scattered. He fired a shot that whizzed past us, striking a tree. Hank grabbed Arthur and shoved him forward. Move, move. Adrenaline surged, and we sprinted. Sarah clung to Arthur's arm, and Marjorie ran with surprising speed. Another shot rang out, punching into the ground near my feet. Fear seized my lungs, but we kept going. We reached the street, where cars rolled by. A policeman stood on the corner, looking alarmed at the commotion. Short Man skidded to a halt, clearly unwilling to gun us down in front of witnesses. We didn't waste time. We dashed into a nearby diner, breathless, hearts hammering. Hank spoke urgently to the diner owner, a hefty man with a kind face. Please, someone's after us. We need to hide, the owner, alarmed by our frantic appearance, pointed to the back. Go into the kitchen. We hurried through the swinging door. A couple of cooks gawked at us, but Hank flashed them a warning look. Marjorie whispered, They must have followed us from Sarah's place, or knew about the meeting somehow. Arthur pressed a hand to his ribs, grimacing. We're not safe anywhere. Sarah's eyes shone with tears. This is insane. Hank exhaled sharply. We have to split up. That's the only way some of us might make it. Marjorie, take the memo. Get to the Ledger. Arthur, you need medical attention. Sarah, you'll go with him. John, you come with me. We'll draw them away. My stomach twisted. We have to protect Arthur. He's the key witness. Arthur rasped. This story can't die with me. Help Marjorie get the evidence out. Marjorie took the paper, stuffing it into her coat. I'll I'll find a way to get it printed, even if I have to use the press myself in the dead of night. Hank nodded. We'll meet at the old train depot on 47th Street tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. If you don't see us, assume we got caught. Go public anyway. Reluctantly, we agreed, slipping out the back. We split into two groups. Marjorie guided Arthur and Sarah toward a taxi stand, while Hank and I headed in the opposite direction, hoping to draw short man's pursuit. As we hurried through side streets, my nerves crackled. Hank kept glancing over his shoulder. We might need a backup plan, he muttered. If Marjorie can't publish in the Ledger, we'll have to try another paper, or maybe pass out flyers ourselves. I nodded, the enormity of it all sinking in. We were just a handful of broke, desperate individuals taking on some of the most powerful forces in the country, yet something in me refused to quit. I thought about the families I'd seen lined up for soup, the children begging in the streets, the men who jumped from buildings when their fortunes vanished. If these vile orchestrators were profiting from that misery, then I wanted them exposed, no matter the cost. We found a seedy motel and paid in cash for a single room. Hank collapsed on the lone bed. Exhausted, I settled in a chair by the window, half expecting men in suits to burst in at any moment. The hours ticked by, each minute steeped in tension. Near midnight, Hank stirred. We should keep moving, he said. I agreed. We slipped out, navigating dark alleys, riding a bus to a different neighborhood to throw off any tale. Finally, at dawn, we found a small cafe. Over weak coffee. Hank asked in a hushed voice, "You sure about this, John? You could walk away now." I stared at the tabletop, images of that alley assault flickering through my mind. Arthur didn't walk away. I can't either. Hank gave a grim nod. Then we keep going. Just as we were about to leave, a man in a wrinkled shirt approached our table. "Are you two the folks looking into Senator Williams?" We froze, hearts pounding. Hank's voice went cold. "Who's asking?" The man raised his hands in a sign of peace. "Name's Paul. I'm a clerk in the senator's office. I overheard some of his men talking about a missing file. They said you had it." Suspicion prickled. "Why, tell us." He looked around anxiously. "Because I've seen things. Backroom deals. Shredded documents. I'm tired of being part of the cover-up." Hank eyed him. "You're risking your life." Paul nodded, fear in his eyes. "I know. But I want to help. Meet me tonight at Grace Church on Maple Avenue. After the evening service, the place empties out. I'll be there." Without another word, he slipped away, leaving us stunned. Hank muttered, "Could be a trap." I sighed. Or our best lead. We decided we had nothing to lose. By nightfall, we stood in the dimly lit nave of Grace Church, the hush broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. Paul emerged from a side door, glancing around nervously. He clutched an envelope. "These are copies of letters and telegrams I've typed for the senator," he whispered. "They detail private meetings with bankers. They talk about manipulating relief funds, rationing resources, even influencing the press." He handed it over. Hank flipped through the papers, his eyebrows shooting up. "This is huge." Paul swallowed hard. "I had to smuggle them out, piece by piece. If I'm caught," his voice trembled, "just get this out there. Expose them." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the church. We spun around to see a figure lurking in the shadows near the entrance. My heart kicked into overdrive. Hank hissed, "We're not alone." Paul paled. I knew this was risky. The footsteps quickened, and then a flash of moonlight revealed short man, gun raised. He stepped forward, mouth twisted in a predatory grin. How touching. A clerk with a conscience. Paul stammered. Stepping back, Hank clutched the envelope. Short man aimed the gun at Hank. "Hand over those papers." My pulse thundered. I glanced behind short man, noticing a second figure stepping in. Tall man, sporting a bandage on his head where Hank had struck him. Tall man growled, "Not so tough now, are you?" Paul looked like he might faint. Hank kept the envelope tight in his grip. "If you kill us, these documents go public anyway," he bluffed. But I wasn't sure it would work this time. Short man smirked. I doubt it. Hand them over. Now. Hank hesitated. I saw him tense, ready to resist. But then Tall Man cocked a pistol as well, pointing it at me. Don't do anything stupid, Tall Man warned. The moment stretched out, tension razor sharp. Then Paul let out a sob. Take them. Just don't shoot. Hank shot Paul a furious glare, but it was too late. Paul's trembling hand plucked the envelope from Hank and extended it toward Short Man. My chest clenched in despair. Without those documents, we had nothing. Short Man snatched the envelope, flipping through it quickly, eyes shining with triumph. Good boy, he sneered. Tall Man turned his gun to Paul. You're coming with us. We can't have you spilling secrets. Paul let out a terrified whimper. Please, no. Hank clenched his fists. He's just a clerk. Short Man raised his weapon. Shut your mouth. I tried to think of some way to stop them, but both men were armed and ready. Defiance burned in me, but I felt the futility of our position. Suddenly, a voice reverberated through the church. Step away from them. We all jumped. From a side alcove, an older priest emerged, holding a crucifix high, a stern glare on his wrinkled face. Put down your weapons, he ordered, his voice firm. Short Man barked a laugh. Beat it, old man. But the priest remained steady. Have you no respect for this sacred space? Tall Man snarled. Get out of here, Father, unless you want to end up on the floor. The priest's hand shook slightly, but he held his ground. This is a house of God. Take your violence elsewhere. For a moment, the tension wavered as Short Man and Tall Man regarded the priest. I seized the chance. Without warning, I lunged at Tall Man, trying to knock his gun aside. The shot went off, echoing painfully against the stone walls. I felt something sear past my shoulder, but adrenaline blunted the pain. The recoil sent Tall Man stumbling, and his gun clattered, Hank reacting instantly. Slammed into Short Man. The envelope flew from Short Man's grip, scattering papers across the pews. The priest cried out in alarm. Paul dove for cover behind a column, while Tall Man scrambled for his weapon. I kicked it away, ignoring the throbbing pain in my shoulder. Hank wrestled with Short Man, their grunts filling the air. Another shot exploded, muzzle flash illuminating the church. Hank yelled in pain, clutching his arm. Short Man tried to aim again, but the priest rushed forward and struck him across the face with the heavy metal base of the crucifix. Short Man dropped like a sack, unconscious. Tall Man cursed, grabbing the scattered documents. Before I could stop him, he bolted down the aisle. Hank was on the floor, bleeding from his arm. The priest helped him up, his eyes wide with shock. I turned, determined to chase Tall Man, but my shoulder burned, and I felt blood trickling down my arm. Paul emerged from behind the column, tears streaming down his face. He's getting away. We stumbled after Tall Man, but by the time we reached the door, he was gone. Outside, the street was deserted except for a lone car speeding away, tires screeching. Rain began to fall, cold droplets hitting our faces. Hank cursed. Sagging against the church's stone wall, breath ragged, he took everything. Paul choked back a sob. I'm so sorry. I panicked. The priest appeared behind us, expression troubled but compassionate. Come back inside. I'll tend to your wounds. We helped Hank inside, Paul and I supporting him. The priest led us to a small back room where he kept medical supplies, while he cleaned Hank's wound. I peeled off my jacket to inspect my shoulder graze. Paul hovered, wringing his hands. What do we do now? Hank winced as the priest dabbed antiseptic on the bloody gash. We still have the memo. Marjorie has it. And we have Arthur's testimony. They didn't get everything. Paul nodded. I remember some details from those letters. Names, meeting locations. I can recreate some of it. A spark of hope flickered in me. Then it's not over. The priest carefully wrapped Hank's arm in bandages. You are fighting a noble battle, but be cautious. Powers like these do not forgive nor forget. Hank exhaled. We know, Father. He turned to me. We still meet Arthur, Sarah, and Marjorie tomorrow at the depot. Let's pray they have better luck. The priest offered us shelter for the night, letting us rest in a cramped back office. Paul dozed fitfully on a bench, Hank on a threadbare cot, and I slumped against the wall, the pain in my shoulder throbbing in time with my heartbeat. Anxiety gnawed at me, but fatigue finally pulled me under. I woke to the faint light of dawn creeping through a high window. We left the church with the priest's blessing, Paul still shaken but resolute in his decision to help. Hank's arm was in a makeshift sling. We had a long day to kill before the rendezvous. So we kept moving to avoid detection, changing buses, ducking into cheap diners to rest. As night fell, we made our way to the old train depot on 47th. The place was nearly abandoned. Just a few battered benches, flickering overhead lights, and the stale scent of old diesel. My stomach churned with worry as we waited. Finally, Marjorie stepped from the shadows. "Over here," she whispered. She looked exhausted but resolute. "I got it," she said, holding up a newspaper mock-up. The Ledger's night editor finally agreed after I showed him the memo. "We're running the story tomorrow morning. I just had to pay the printing staff out of my own pocket to ensure it gets published." Relief surged in my chest. "That's incredible." Arthur and Sarah emerged next. Arthur still looking pale but determined. "Thank God," he said, upon seeing us. Then he noticed Hank's bandaged arm. "Trouble." Hank gave a humorless chuckle. "You could say that. They tried to take us out." I explained how we nearly lost everything at the church. Paul stepped forward nervously. Arthur eyed him warily. "Who's this?" "Paul, a clerk from the senator's office." I said, "He wants to help." Paul greeted Arthur shyly. "I know what they did to you. I'm sorry." Arthur nodded. "We need all the help we can get." Marjorie glanced around the empty depot. "We should go somewhere safer. Once the story hits, they'll come down on us hard." Hank frowned. "Is anywhere really safe?" Arthur set his jaw. "We'll lay low. After the article is printed, it might gain traction. People will see the truth." Sarah squeezed Arthur's hand. "I'm proud of you." For a moment, we allowed ourselves a fragile sense of hope. But then footsteps echoed across the depot floor. We spun to see a squad of uniformed policemen marching in, led by a stern-faced detective. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. My stomach plummeted. Were we under arrest? Had the senator's influence stretched this far? The detective approached, a piece of paper in hand. "John Harrington, Henry Whitaker, Arthur Lambert. You're all wanted for questioning regarding assault and theft of confidential documents. Hand them over." Hank hissed under his breath. "We're being framed." Marjorie raised her hands. "Officer, we have evidence." The detective cut her off. "I don't want to hear it. You come quietly, or we do this the hard way." Paul took a step back, trembling. "Wait, these men are telling the truth. I work for Senator Williams." The detective's eyes narrowed. "Then you're a suspect too." Arthur winced, slumping. "This can't be happening." Hank set his jaw. "They're using the police as their muscle." The detective motioned to his men. "Cuff them." Time seemed to slow as the officers advanced. I looked at Arthur, remembering why we'd risked everything. My gaze met Hank's, and I saw the same determination. In a split second, Hank shoved the nearest cop, sending him stumbling. Chaos erupted. Marjorie screamed. "Run!" Arthur grabbed Sarah's hand, but two cops seized him. I rushed forward, trying to pry them off. An officer swung his baton at me. I felt it connect with my ribs, a flash of white, hot pain. Hank tackled another policeman, and they both went crashing into a bench. Paul stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Then, out of nowhere, a commanding voice boomed. "Stand down!" We all halted in confusion. A figure in a sharp suit strode into view, a federal agent, judging by the badge he flashed. He barked at the detective. "These individuals are under federal jurisdiction now." The detective looked stunned. "What? Under whose authority?" The agent squared his shoulders. "Under direct orders from Washington. We've been tracking corruption linked to certain politicians, and these people may be key witnesses." The detective bristled, but his men backed off. The agent turned to us. "Which one of you is Arthur Lambert?" Arthur, still pinned by two officers, raised a hand weakly. I am. The agent nodded. Come with me. We need your testimony. Hank and I stared, not sure whether to trust him. The agent flashed a sympathetic look. I know you're scared, but you have to believe me. This order came from the Justice Department. There are still good men in the government who want the truth. The detective snarled. We had them first. The agent held firm. Your warrant is revoked by federal order. He glanced at Arthur. I'm sorry for everything you've been through, I assure you. I am not with Senator Williams. There are those in Washington who suspected foul play behind the depression for months. We needed concrete evidence. You have it. Arthur exchanged a questioning glance with me. Hank and Marjorie. Tentatively, he said, yes, we do. It's being published tomorrow in the City Ledger. The agent's stoic facade cracked into a brief smile. Good. That'll help. We'll need your full cooperation. The detective, fuming, finally gestured for his men to stand down. One by one, they released us. Sarah hurried to Arthur's side, fear mingled with hope. Hank exhaled, cradling his injured arm. I pressed a hand to my aching ribs. The agent motioned for a few other federal officers to step forward. You'll be placed under protective custody until we can get you in front of the right people. Arthur hesitated. What's your name? Agent, he answered firmly. Agent Robert McAllister. Arthur squared his shoulders. All right, Agent McAllister. If you're truly on our side, then let's expose these traitors. McAllister nodded. That's the plan. He turned to the detective. Your men can leave now. We have this under control. The detective glared but had no choice. Slowly, the local officers filed out. The depot fell silent, except for the distant rumble of a train passing somewhere in the night. Agent McAllister addressed us. There's a safe house on the outskirts of the city. We'll keep you there until the Ledger article hits. Then we'll move forward with official investigations. Senator Williams has more enemies in Washington than he realizes. Hank, exhausted, could only nod. Marjorie looked relieved, clutching the precious mock-up of the newspaper. Sarah helped Arthur walk, and Paul hovered anxiously. I looked at the battered group of us, bruised, bleeding, terrified, yet still holding on to hope. It struck me that this was just the beginning of a long battle. But at least we were not alone anymore. The truth, once kept hidden, was about to be unleashed. The next day, the City Ledger ran the story on its front page. Is the Depression manufactured? Leaked memo suggests high-level conspiracy. Though some tried to dismiss it as sensationalism, the public's reaction was electric. Hunger, desperation, and anger fueled a collective outcry. Within days, other papers picked up the story. Whispers spread like wildfire across bread lines, factories, and street corners. People demanded answers. The Justice Department, emboldened by public pressure, launched official inquiries. Senators were subpoenaed, bankers were called in for questioning, and the ominous cloud of secrecy began to lift, bit by bit. Agent McAllister arranged for Arthur to testify behind closed doors, revealing the details he had memorized. Paul provided corroborating documents, recollecting typed correspondences between powerful figures. Hank and I gave statements about what we witnessed that fateful night in the alley and at the Hotel Le Grand. Sarah stood by Arthur's side throughout, face resolute, no longer the frightened sister but a pillar of strength. The fallout was massive. Senator Williams vehemently denied all allegations, calling it a smear campaign by political enemies, but as more evidence surfaced, his credibility crumbled. Tall man and short man were eventually apprehended after a standoff, leaving them with little choice but to spill details to cut deals with prosecutors. Each testimony, each leaked file, chipped away at the fortress of deceit that had cloaked the truth for years. The scandal rocked the nation, forcing people to confront a horrifying possibility that the Great Depression might not have been a mere tragedy of economics, but a manipulated crisis. Some refused to believe it, clinging to the comforting narrative that such evil was impossible. Others raged against the system, demanding sweeping reforms. In time, new regulations emerged, Institutions were overhauled, and a renewed determination took hold among ordinary citizens to never again let a handful of men toy with the nation's fate. For me, John Harrington, life would never be the same. I left Chicago seeking a fresh start in a small town out west, but I carried with me the memory of Arthur's bruised face, the clang of metal on cobblestones, and the pang of fear in my chest that night. Occasionally, the first open a newspaper and see a mention of the continuing trials, the revelations, the slow process of healing a wounded America. And I'd remember that moment in the alley when a single piece of paper landed at my feet, changing everything. Arthur and Sarah eventually settled on a modest farm away from the city's hustle. Hank continued working with the feds as a consultant, helping to root out corruption. Marjorie thrived as an investigative journalist, her fearless reporting inspiring others to question authority. Paul, haunted by guilt, testified against Senator Williams in open court, ensuring the final nail in the coffin of that monstrous conspiracy. In the aftermath, many tried to rewrite the story, to downplay the significance or label it a bizarre chapter in American history. Some said it was all politics. Some said it was overblown. But for those of us who lived through it, who bore the bruises and scars, the story was all too real. We'd seen firsthand how easily a nation's suffering could be orchestrated by men whose greed eclipsed their conscience. And we'd learned that shining light into the darkest corners could topple even the mightiest illusions. Today, when people speak of the Great Depression, they recount the breadlines, the Dust Bowl, the broken families. They don't always speak of the hidden story we unearthed, the one so shocking that America refused to believe it at first. But eventually, the truth found its way into the open, because truth, once it takes root, cannot be fully silenced. So this is the story I tell, the hidden story from the Great Depression that America refused to believe, finally told. It began in a dingy alley with a battered man and a stolen file, grew into a cross-city chase fueled by desperation and courage, and ended in a reckoning that shook the foundations of power. Maybe it didn't end the Depression overnight. Maybe it didn't stop all corruption, but it proved that a few determined souls could fight back against the shadows. And if enough people dared to stand up, the darkest secrets could no longer remain buried. That, I believe, is what truly saves a nation.